Welcome everyone. This is weird. I'm used to doing this in front of an audience, but there is no audience today. But welcome anyway. This is the second day of the VIP event, the introduction of pdfToolbox 12, and we have a very geeky session today. I also have an echo in the room. Some technical issues here. Maybe not the most geeky session, but at least I'm going to compete for that today. We're going to talk about JavaScript fixups, which is already technically a mistake, but we'll get to that. The background for this is that if you think back to before pdfToolbox 12, then, well, in pdfToolbox 10, for example, there was a way to set up complex fixups, and you can see one on screen with lots of variables to control it. So of course you can use it just with the UI features and so on, but you could also put lots of variables in there and then control it from the outside. The difficulty with that is that, well, you need lots and lots and lots of variables. So in pdfToolbox 11, two new fixups were added, one of which you can see on the screen now. And the idea there was that instead of having lots of UI and lots of variables, there was one edit window where you had a JSON expression. And that replaced the UI. So everything that normally you would specify in the UI, you would now put in this JSON expression. And then that JSON expression was controllable with a variable. There are still some problems with that. First of all, it is limited to those two special fixups, of course. And if you give people two fixups, then all of a sudden they find the need to have 5 others that can be controlled that way. So that definitely was a negative. The second one is a little bit more subtle, and it's what I have on the slide, the fact that you can only have one fixup at a time. But if you think a little bit further, it's also the fact that sometimes if you use lots of variables, it's difficult because you don't know ahead of time how many steps you might need and so on. And if you have this JSON, you always need an additional step to configure the JSON and then pass it to this fixup. So it's much better than not having it, but there are definitely downsides to this. And so in pdfToolbox 12, there is a new concept, and the new concept has absolutely no cool abbreviation. It is called arbitrary JavaScript controlled fixups. And while it says fixups, it's really only a new fixup type. And that fixup type lives in, strangely enough, the document category. I don't think there is any good category to put it in because it's kind of special. It would need its own category. So if you go to the fixup window and you go to document, you will find something called that very long name, and you can click on that, and then you get a completely new UI to configure it. What's the purpose of this additional fixup type? Well, first of all, it allows setting up any fixup type in pdfToolbox using JavaScript. So in this configuration area that you get, you are not limited to specifying one fixup. You can specify many, and they can be of any type that you have in pdfToolbox. It also gives you a way to identify the resources that are needed to keep things working well in pdfToolbox. And if you can't imagine what I mean with resources, imagine a color conversion, for example, where you identify the ICC profile that is the destination profile for the color conversion. The fixup defines the color conversion, but it needs a resource, and that is that ICC profile. And when in pdfToolbox you export that fixup and you give it to someone else, that resource has to be copied along in some way. And so this new fixup type lets you use JavaScript to define not only the configuration, but also which of these resources are necessary to let the fixup work. And in short, it's really cool. When you start playing with it, you will probably have the same reaction at least I had, which is to think of at least 2 other things you want to be able to control with JavaScript, and then you should please send in a feature request, because that means I might get it earlier as well. So how does it look? Well, it looks kind of impressive, and if you open up a new one, it won't have all this code in it that you see here, because I've already filled it with some stuff. But in general, there are 2 areas, 2 editors that you can see. At the top, there is a configuration area, and this configuration area contains JavaScript, same as what Olaf said yesterday when he was talking about quick fix. It's not JSON, it is JavaScript, and that is important. And in that JavaScript, you define all of the information for that fixup. And we'll look in a little bit more detail, and also in pdfToolbox itself, where I can zoom in a little bit easier later. But basically, that top area in the fixup is where you fill in the configuration. At the side of that area, you have help information. This is perhaps the most important part of everything, because creating such a piece of JavaScript from scratch can be quite challenging. Believe me, I've done it. It can be a little bit of a challenge if you would want to do this from scratch. And so you need to use the resources that you have on the right-hand side to help you figure out what you want to write. And I'll come back on that in the demo as well. But just so you already know, there is a way to insert a base fixup. If you have pdfToolbox 12 to follow along, then you will see that there is a menu item called Insert Base Fixup, and that allows you to insert a template if you want, an empty template of a particular type of fixup. And then you have Insert Configured Fixup, and that shows you the fixups that you have in your library, and it will allow you to copy the JavaScript equivalent of any of those fixups in your library. Yeah. And then there is a third thing that I will show you, which is more in the direction of documentation. A third thing that I will show you a little bit later during the demo as well. Okay, so the resource area. So that's that second area, the one that you have at the bottom of the fixup. That is where you specify which resources are needed by the fixup that you're describing in JavaScript. And that is not empty when you create a new fixup. It will always contain a number of properties. So this is an object at the top level, and then it has names in there, and each of those names has an associated array. Yeah? And those arrays are empty right now. But there you can specify the resources that are needed for the fixup. So let me see if I can...
David?
Yes.
You have a question?
Yes.
Yeah, will this feature be available to the PDF Engine SDK as well?
That is a good question, and you probably know the answer better than I do.
Yeah. Yeah. So just I'm Ulrich Frotscher from Callas Software, and I also developed this feature, so I should know. In the SDK, of course, you can use JavaScript, predefined JavaScript Fixup that was created in the desktop application. So it's just a normal Fixup that can be used in every pdfToolbox version. So you can use it with CLI and SDK and desktop, of course. If the question is more about can I define or build a JavaScript-based Fixup using the SDK. This would be a little bit more complicated question, because I think what you could do, I haven't tested this, but I think what could be possible is that you just use a variable or a JSON file and put the contents of that as a variable and use it in that JavaScript-based Fixup. But there's no dedicated SDK function in the SDK that allows you to use JavaScript in order to create a Fixup.
Yeah, so it's mostly that it's just available as a Fixup because every Fixup is available for execution, but yeah.
You can use it in the very same way, I mean, in the SDK as well. So.
Yeah. Okay. Other questions? No?
No.
Cool. So I have opened pdfToolbox 12 meanwhile, and let me just remind you, if you're watching this, then it means you also have access to pdfToolbox 12 in the on the webpage with the agenda. There were download links. If you haven't done that, feel free to do so. So you can follow along with what's going on here. The official release of pdfToolbox 12 isn't there yet, so you will need to go there and use those links to download the software. So I have my Fixup list in pdfToolbox 12, and then if I would go to create Fixup, zoom out a little bit again, and then either you go to the document area or you can type something like JavaScript, and then you will see the Fixup that is called arbitrary JavaScript controlled Fixups. There really is no abbreviation you can think of that makes that easier. But you have it in lists, and that means that I can have the configuration section here at the bottom, and what you can see is that the top is completely empty. That's the configuration area for the JavaScript Fixup itself. And then at the bottom of this area, I have the resources, and there I have something, but all the arrays that are referenced there are empty because, of course, at the moment I don't need any resources. And now the question is how we get going with that. And rather than show you something I've done ahead of time, let me show you the ways that you have to build something. So this will probably go wrong at some point because I'm now trying to do this from scratch, but we'll deal with that when it happens. So first, the two menu items that I talked about before, you have this insert base Fixup and insert configured Fixup. I will do the base Fixup one, and that gives me a list of any other Fixup in pdfToolbox. And I can now search for the one that I want, and I thought I looked at something with pages. So I could use flip pages, for example, which does a horizontal or vertical flip. And then I do insert, and insert copies something into my configuration area. And you have it here. So I could clean it up a little bit because, of course, this is not the way I like to see code, but I would probably copy and paste it into Visual Studio and let it clean up this thing a little bit. But the essential stuff that you need to see here is I have a top level object here. And in that top level object, let me zoom in a little bit. In that top level object, I have something that has a property, actually a JavaScript property that is now flip pages. And flip pages is the internal name for the action or the Fixup, sorry, that we want to use. And this has to be exact in order for pdfToolbox to know what Fixup it is that you are specifying. So that is the first thing that is very important. And then you have a config section, which can be either an object or an array. And in there, you set up the configuration, the parameters that are specific for that particular fixup. So we're doing flip pages. Flip pages needs, for example, to know which pages it's going to flip. It also needs to know whether it's going to flip them horizontally or vertically. And so I need to specify those things. And by using this insert fixup, I get a template, if you want, of a possible configuration. And I don't have to figure out by myself somehow what all these things are going to be. And then there is something called display name, and then the other one is display description, comment, display comment. See, it's easier when it's inserted for you. I'll show you in a second how you can do that as well. But I have a display name field as well, and this one is interesting too. I have, of course, a name for my fixup. I haven't renamed it yet, so it's still called new fixup here at the top. And if I wouldn't have this display name field, then that is normally the name that is used in Preflight reports and so on. Yeah, if you make a normal fixup, then whatever that fixup is called in the fixup list is what is going to be used in the Preflight report. If I use this display name here, that will override what you have in the fixup itself. So even though my fixup might have a very technical internal name, so I know what it was for, what project it was built for, and so on, I can still have a user-friendly name here, and that will end up in the Preflight report. So that's the one that is used to report on it. And then at the bottom, I have this, as we said before, I have this resources section, but actually in this case, I have no need to put something in this resource section, because the way it is defined now, it will absolutely work without that. It doesn't need any external resources. So that is one thing that I can do, and let me cancel that and then create another new one. Because the other thing I can do, I said, is I can use a fixup that already existed and copy that into my JavaScript section. So I will do create fixup again, and then I'm going to search for JavaScript again. And here I am again with a blank configuration area. And now I'm going to do insert configured fixup. And the difference is that now I don't see all of the different fixup types that are available in the product. What I see now is all the fixups I had previously created in my library, current library. Yeah? And so we could have a look what I have here, and I have some things here that are called templates. And I call them that way because I configured them separately to use them here as a template. So now when I do insert, I get something that it looks a little bit different. Yeah. So first of all, you can see that in this section here, where it said false before for this parameter, it now says true, and where the value before was something like all pages, now it says detect first page. And detect first page is the name of a check. If you would look at the normal fixup to flip pages, you'll see that it has an apply to property, and that apply to property, as you know, can be a preflight check, and that preflight check identifies which pages are going to be flipped. Well, I created such a preflight check. I called it detect first page, so that it hits only on the first page, and the name of that preflight check is now inserted into my JavaScript. If you now look at the resource section, so if we scroll down here and I show you this, then you can see that in this resource section there is something called checks. And now that array is no longer empty, but it has the same name of this check that I use in that fixup. And that means if I would export this fixup now, and then look at what is in there and I give it to someone else, it will not just export my my fixup, it will also export the check that was used in the fixup. Yeah? Just as it would do with a standard fixup that you made for this page flipping. So no difference there. So what does that mean? That means that if I now look at the same thing that I prepared before and that I did clean up a little bit. So here we have something that looks very similar, and I have used everything here. So I have a configuration object. I have the parameters that we want to use. In this one, I have set a display name and I have set a display comment, which is the description of the fixup. And then I just return this to pdfToolbox. Yeah? And when you run this, it will flip the pages in the document and it will flip them to, will flip them horizontally. If my test mode would want to come up, there you can see that it flipped everything horizontally. And if I look at what it says in the result window, it says all pages flipped horizontally, even though, and this is what I said before, even though if you look at the name of my fix, it is completely different. It's 0401 flip pages horizontally. So what you specify in JavaScript for the name overrides what you have as the real fixup name here. Okay. Now, why is this configuration area set up like this? Why do I have to specify this flip pages as a key in the property section? Well, of course, because you can specify multiple fixups in one configuration area. So if I build a fixup, I can actually specify multiple things to be run at the same time. There is one thing that you cannot do, and I will show you something that is not going to work. Well, it is going to work, but it's not going to work the way you would expect it to work. So remember what I show here, but don't do this at home. So what I've tried here is something, I tried to be clever, and then I figured out I am not that clever. I set up something that was called flip horizontally, and then I set something up that was flip vertically, and then I create something to pass to pdfToolbox, which is, and I need to scroll here a little bit or it's not going to be visible. So I set something up for pdfToolbox, a configuration object, and there I inserted this flip horizontally and flip vertically. Now, if you know anything about JavaScript, you can see that I'm doing something here that is not possible, not allowed in JavaScript. And actually, pdfToolbox already shows you that. It says duplicate key. An object in JavaScript cannot have two properties with the same name. Yeah? There is a reason, an internal implementation reason that this is set up this way. This is not going to work. So if I would run this one, my file is going to be flipped vertically because that is the last one that I add to that object. Even though you get a warning message here, it is going to run, but it's going to just flip vertically. It's not going to do the flip in both directions. Unfortunately, having the same fixup multiple times is not supported. However, any fixup where you have this little minus and plus in the fixup itself, so you can have different things that happen in that fixup, that will work. Yeah, and if you want to see how to set that up, I would advise you to create a template fixup, set it up with multiple of these steps, and then just do insert configured fixup and see what the JavaScript looks like that you need in that case. Okay. One more thing, in the slides I showed you two things that you can use to help you with figuring out what you need in there. There is actually a third thing. So we looked at insert base fixup and insert configured fixup. There is a third thing here that says open list of all base fixups. And if I select that, it will open up a web browser. And in that web browser, it shows you, let me zoom in just a little bit there. It shows you for all of the fixup types. So this is a very long document that you'll get. And for all of the fixup types, it shows you all of the different configuration that you can set up, including, and this is something that is sometimes missing with these other ones. Let me see if I have a good example. Yeah, so including in those fixups where you normally have a pull down menu to configure something, this will show you also all the values for those items in the pull down. So if you want to figure out, well, in a normal fixup, I would use this pull down menu and I would select CMYK 100% black only. What do I need to do in JavaScript to specify that? Well, that will show you what the value is that you need in JavaScript as well. Yeah. So I think the combination of using configured fixups and inserting those, so you can start from something that already comes close to what you want, and then using this documentation to see all those pop-up values and so on is probably going to save you the maximum amount of time when you try to set this up. Okay. Yes.
There are some questions in the chat. Peter Kleinheider asked whether he can define a custom ID, and again I will answer. Unfortunately, not. And I just tried it out. Even the custom ID that is defined in the JavaScript fixup itself will not survive.
So you mean the one that is defined here in the yeah?
So
okay.
Unfortunately not, but I think it's a good suggestion just to add that to the JavaScript part for each fixups. If I understand correctly, you want to be able to have a different custom ID for each fixup feature that is defined inside the JavaScript.
I think that would make total sense. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And then the other question is, would it be possible to create an array with 2 objects? And I think that's basically that what you just described. It is not an array, it is an object for a reason.
So I got this feature, just to explain, I got this feature in a pre-release of pdfToolbox 12, and one of the first things I tried was, can I cheat the system here and have multiple times the same thing? And then I tried just about any syntax I could think of to make this work. And then in the end, I asked Ulrich, can this be done? And he said no. So no, that's not possible. So only for fixups where you have multiple actions in the fixup itself. So I'm not sure you follow what I'm talking about there, but let me try and give you an example. If I would go to create fixup and I would look at, let's say map, for example. So here I have a classic fixup, lots of properties, and then at the bottom there is this little plus, and if I hit the plus, then I get an extra configuration area and I can add as many as I want. So this, yes, this can be represented in JavaScript because this fixup supports that. And that would mean that you need to specify the config area a little bit different. And in this case, the config area would not be an object, but it would be an array with config objects in it. But having the same fixup twice, that is not possible. Multiple fixups, yes. If I want to flip pages and I also want to extend them, then I can just have a configuration for flip pages. I can have a configuration for, what is it, a large media box or something like that. And those you can add together in that configuration area. That is not a problem. But they need to have a different name, so they need to be of a different type. Other questions?
And one thing to add, the order of execution cannot be manipulated by JavaScript. So because it's an object, it's just you can give it an order, but this order will not be regarded during execution. So it's basically the execution is the same as for profiles containing multiple fixups. In this case, you also cannot define an order of execution. If you want to do that, you have to use process plans.
Yeah, I think this is, like I said in the beginning, I think this is one of those features where as soon as you start playing with it, you see all kinds of other options that are perhaps not implemented at the moment and not possible at the moment, but that perhaps you can think would be nice for a future version.
I mean, the limitations that we're just discussing, so in the pdfToolbox execution engine doesn't allow you to have the same fixups, same type of fixup several times in the same profile. So we kind of looking at something that allows you to control fixups via JavaScript, but the engine as it is designed doesn't change, and the limitation to not have the same fixup twice with different configuration is just in the engine, and so is the order of execution, right? So I wouldn't think of this as a limitation. So if you would want, if you are in the need of having the same type of fixup twice in the profile, and that isn't possible, then the question to us is, why isn't that possible? And that doesn't apply to this JavaScript interface. It does apply to the Fixup engine in general.
So why isn't that possible?
No, of course you have to be more concrete. So, because wherever we believe it's possible, you have different configuration, as David has just shown.
Yeah.
Okay. One other question, will it be possible to define apply to checks via JavaScript? I think you have shown that already.
Yeah, so the answer is definitely that is possible. And that is exactly what I showed before. So I will show you the template that I used. So this template was a, which one was it? Flip first page. So this is a regular fix-up, and it flips the page horizontally, but then it has an apply to filter that says detect first page. So only the first page should be flipped. Yeah? And what I showed is that you can actually put this in JavaScript, and then the preflight check that you use in this apply to will be referenced. So in the configuration area, you have to specify the name of that preflight check. And in the resource area, you also have to specify the name of that check. You have to specify it in the configuration area because, of course, pdfToolbox needs to know what apply to you want to use, and you have to specify it again in the resource section so that if this fixup is executed, not executed, exported, that pdfToolbox knows that it also has to export this check and then bundle it together with the fixup, just as it would for a regular fixup like the one I have on screen right now. So that is absolutely possible.
Yeah, I think after thinking more about over this question, I think the question is more, can I create a new check from the JavaScript Fixup configuration UI? And the answer is no, you can't, but would be good.
That's a very
idea.
good question. Thank you. It would probably be good if you make that a feature request and send it in, because it's exactly the same question that I have as well. Like I said, once you start playing with this, you'll find many other things that you can imagine to do with this kind of this kind of functionality. It is at the moment limited to fixups, but of course, yeah, you can start thinking about other possibilities. But at the moment, no. At the moment, you need to make a standard preflight check, and then you just reference it in the configuration, and the referencing happens by name. It's not an ID or anything. It's just the name of the preflight check that you have to specify there. Or?
Yeah, once you save that fixup, it actually becomes a reference by ID. So it's more for the user interface reasons, so that you if you know the name of that check, you can also type it in if you spell it correctly. And once you press OK, it will look up this check and will create a real reference for that.
And if we change the name of the check afterwards, that will not break what happens in this JavaScript fixup then?
Correctly, because it's a real parent-child dependency, and it is only resolved to names once you open that again in the editor.
Safer than I expected. Good. Okay, so let me use the last bit of time I have here to show you a more or less concrete example. I try to simplify it as much as possible because, well, otherwise it becomes difficult to see what happens here. But I have a file here that contains a bunch of spot color, and then at the top I have a color bar. Yeah, you can see it is a really nice color bar that I made in Illustrator. That's why it looks so, well, damaged. And that color bar contains specific spot color names. It looks like cyan and magenta, but in reality, these colors are color bar 1, color bar 2, I believe. So I've used spot colors with a particular name. And then I have a little process plan that will remap the colors in the color bar to the actual colors in the document. And I will use a new feature in pdfToolbox 12, which is pressing the Option key, and I need to make sure I press the Option and not Control. So I will press the Option key and then click on Edit for the process plan. And the result is that instead of opening it in the editor, it opens it immediately in test mode. And sometimes that can be really handy. And so look at what happens. At the top here, you can still see my document in the background with the cyan and magenta. And at the bottom, I have the same color bar, but now it is modified and I have the color from the gold that I have in this package. And I have the other color is the background of the package. Yeah. I also have spot colors in this file for the cut lines and the fold lines, but those have been filtered out in what I created here. And when you look at the result window, you can see what happened. There is a first step that is a quick check step that will get spot color information from the file. And then there is a second step and that is just because it's easy and fast and so on. And there is a second step that does the actual remapping of the spot colors. So what do we have in there? Well, the quick check step, I'm going to think that you know what that is. And if not, we have YouTube movies about that from last year's VIP event. And then the other one is, and now I just need to remember how I called that. That is probably, no, this is a template. I'm assuming that it is this one. Yep. Let me see if I can get this a little bit better on the screen somehow. So now you have this, this configuration area. Because this is a JavaScript controlled fixup. And the JavaScript controlled fixup, you can see that this already looks a little bit more difficult than what we had before, because instead of just having this configuration part now, I actually calculate on the fly what the configuration area needs to be, and then I build config with all the parameters that I need and so on the fly. Yeah. And this is particularly important to do it this way because I have a very simple example, but in the real world, you might not know ahead of time how many spot colors you have in the document. So how many spot colors to replace in the color bar. And you might have to remap some other colors in this color bar to none because you don't have enough spot colors in the document. So there is a bit of calculation going on to figure out what kind of setup you want. And this is a prime example of something that was difficult when you only had UI and variables, not just because you would have to create an enormous amount of variables to do this, but also because ahead of time you can't know how many steps you actually need. And that made the whole process kind of difficult. And now I just calculate that, and in the end, I build a configuration. So this is what is eventually passed to pdfToolbox. And then in that configuration, I have an array of, and I build that here, I have an array of configs, one for each spot color that I want to remap, and then a display name, and that's it. And that is passed to pdfToolbox. And then you can see, this is a little trick there. If you want to be able to see what configuration you're actually going to pass, then you can do things like just writing it out. And in this case, I wrote it out with a JSON stringify so I can see how that is going to look. Even though this looks very complex, when you look at the resource section, you will see that there is nothing in the resource section because I am actually not doing a color conversion, so I don't need an ICC profile or anything like that. All I do is remapping one spot color to another spot color, one name to another name, and that doesn't need any resources. So the resource section itself, in this case, can be empty. Yeah? So what is the big difference between what you could do in pdfToolbox 11 and here in 12 is that in 11, I would have needed an additional process plan step to calculate a configuration, a JSON configuration for this JSON fixup. And then I would have to put that in a variable, and the fixup would have to be configured with that variable so that it can do its job. While here, because this is not JSON but JavaScript, I can actually have all the calculation that I need, and you can see that there is some remapping that happens and some other magic that filters out certain spot color names and so on. I can do all of that, and I can do it in my JavaScript controlled fixup. The only thing that is important is that at the end of the trip, I calculate a configuration and I pass that to pdfToolbox. What I do before that actually doesn't matter, and it can be as complex as you want. Of course, you have to be kind of on the geeky side to appreciate that, but I appreciate it very much. And you can see that it actually works because when I tested that, it does the conversion of those colors in the color bar, and it actually takes the right colors, the background and the gold, and it doesn't take, you would see that because it's green, it doesn't take, for example, the color of the cut line in there. That is filtered out. Okay, I think that's what I wanted to cover. Now, I don't know if there are any other questions.
Yes, I try to use the microphone more correctly to be better understandable. So there's one other question regarding resources, especially checks. So the question is, can I reference more than one check in this area and decide later in the script which one I want to use for the apply to check?
And the answer is yes, you can. So this resource area, as you could see, it is an object that has names. One of the names was or properties. One of the properties was checks, and then the value of that is an array, a list of things. So in that array, you can have as many different resources, in this case checks, as you want. And then in your configuration area, you do whatever calculation you want to do, and then you decide which you want to use. In fact, in this configuration area, in the resource area, let me see if I can show you just that quickly. So in this resource area, you also have this little I, and not a real I, but a letter I. And there you can choose a resource, And when you select it, it will be inserted into the JavaScript part. So again, you don't really need to know, I was going to say you don't need to know what you're doing, but it's better that you know what you're doing. You don't have to remember the names or anything like that. You just use one of these things and you insert them. So for example, if I do insert custom check, it shows me, come here. Yes, it shows me all the checks that I have in my current library, and then I can insert any of those, and that will be added to the. It should be added to the configuration. Did I press the wrong button, or? Well, anyway, it should be.
You covered the button with your body.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't. So we don't know. But I'm sure if you there it is. So that was an update issue. So it inserts that resource into the resource area. More questions?
Yeah. So. Okay, so another question to the SDK topic, I think, was answered already in the chat.
Good.
And the question is whether that's correct, and I would say yes. So the self-given answer was I can just create a JavaScript and a script and load a JSON file from inside that script, for example. By using the file object, and then this way I could create a JavaScript controlled Fixup that just reads a configuration from disk, and even the path to that file could be defined by a variable or could be retrieved from a REST API or whatever. So JavaScript engine is very capable of all such things.
Yeah, and you could do that here in the desktop or in the CLI, of course, as well. We have examples, actually. We've looked at some of those in the past as well, I think, where you do exactly that. There is some variable, and that determines which configuration file is read, and that is then passed to pdfToolbox again. So those things are definitely possible. So there is nothing special about this configuration section. It is just JavaScript. The same type of JavaScript as you have in other parts of pdfToolbox. So anything that you could do with JavaScript in a process plan step or something, you can also do here.
Further question, is it still possible to use full path to external ICC profiles? And yes, it is possible. So in this case, you have the problem that the ICC profile is not transported with a KFPX file. So if you just use a path and don't have it in the resource section, it will work, but you have to have the ICC profile at that path, obviously.
Yeah. More?
One more question. When would one use the arbitrary JavaScript over the process plan?
Those are actually, I think my answer is going to be, those are actually two very different things. Yeah. As we just said, you can't define the same fixup twice in a JavaScript controlled fixup, and you can't control the order of execution. So the question actually is the same as when should I use a Preflight profile and when should I use a process plan, which is a concept I always explain in detail during trainings. So you haven't seen one of my trainings, obviously. But it's the same question. If you need order of things, then definitely use a process plan. Also, even though I'm a developer and I like to write code and so on, and it's very geeky and interesting, and making a process plan with existing fixups and actions and all the other things, all the other steps you have in a process plan, is still going to be much quicker than setting up a correct JavaScript for use in here. So I think the answer I would give is you use this when when you really need to use it, when there is no other way to accomplish what you can do. That would, I think, be my answer. But if you can do it with a standard process plan, just by dragging things in the right order and connecting them correctly, then I think that, for me at least, would still have the preference.